The Giants sweep the Rockies again, and they live to see another day. Their playoff odds, while extremely remote, are technically still alive. Carlos Rodon looked like a potential Cy Young winner in what may have been his last start at home with the Giants. So we'll get into all of it next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes, Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. BetOnline.net has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And where we start is by just pointing out that the Giants refuse to lose right now. They sweep the Colorado Rockies again for the second time in a matter of a week and a half, including a 4-game sweep in Denver. It's funny, I tweeted out right before that series started that the Giants had all these upcoming games against the D-backs and the Rockies, and if they struggled, it was not out of the question that they could finish in last place in the division. Well, since that time, they've gone 9-1, and so they just need one more win or one D-backs loss, and they will guarantee themselves third place in the division. They can't finish in second, they can't finish in last, and one more win or D-backs loss, and they'll guarantee third place. And they got back to 500, which I think is a big deal. We've kind of laid out why over the last several days. Jock Peterson doesn't think it's a big deal, but other players do. Gabe Kapler even said he called it a soft focus goal. But, I mean, when you're right there, why not? Why not? To me, like, anything you can do to motivate you as a team and motivate you individually is something worth doing. And because the Giants have played so well here in their last 10 games, they've staved off elimination. So the odds are extremely slim. We're just going to lay out what would need to happen. The reality is the Giants, they don't need to win out as of this moment. But if the Phillies or Brewers win one more game, the Giants would need to win out. But as it is right now, the Giants could technically go 5-1. And then that would mean the Phillies and Brewers would need to lose every single remaining game beginning Friday morning. If the Giants go 5-1. If the Giants go 6-0, then the Brewers and the Phillies could each lose or win once, but they can't win twice. And so the odds of this happening are low, but every day that goes by that it keeps happening, where the Giants win and these teams aren't winning, the odds get significantly better. And so it's not going to become like any kind of realistic odds until we're like 4 more games into this, and if the hope is still alive. But I'm just gonna say the odds, even though they're alive with 6 games left, it's about as impossible as it could possibly be at this point. They're 5.5 back with 6 to play is the way that comes out. And the Phillies, by the way, they play a double header today in Washington, D.C. I think they have a 4-game series there, 2 today, 1 tomorrow, and 1 on Sunday. And the Nationals are like the worst team in baseball this year. And the Phillies are currently winning. And so, yeah, if the Phillies hang on to win that game, if they win the second game, the Giants are eliminated no matter what the Giants do. But if the Phillies hold on to win this game and then lose the next one, the Giants can't lose again. So anyway, it's just worth saying that. I'm not saying it because it's likely. I'm saying it because it's the reality of the situation. So I like to see it. I've said I think the most important thing perhaps for finishing at 500 or better is kind of when you're trying to lure free agents to your team. I think it matters what your record was. And so if the Giants, they could have easily floundered down the stretch here and ended up like 72-90. It was looking possible there a couple weeks ago, but instead they have a chance. I mean, if they win out, they could win 84 games, and 84 and 78 would look a whole heck of a lot better than something like 72 and 90. And I don't know. I mean, a lot of players, Carlos Rodon has mentioned this. Jock Peterson was very clear that he only wants to play for a team that goes to the postseason. And I mean, Peterson was here all year, but guys like Judge and whoever else, Nimmo, Trey Turner, unfortunately witnessed how bad the Giants played against the Dodgers this year. Xander Bogaerts, though, he's in Boston. They're not really paying attention to the San Francisco Giants. So when you look up at the end of the year and you're considering playing for a team, you look at the standings for sure. And you also talk to friends around the game and talk about how that team was and what it's like playing there. Another reason, by the way, it's nice to have Buster Posey in the ownership group because he can be part of that conversation when they're talking to free agents. And he even said that when he was introduced and met with the media as a member of the ownership group and part of the board of directors, was that if they want him to kind of talk to and vet these potential free agents, he can do that. But I'm kind of digressing. I just think that it is important to have as good of a record as you can have. And also those storylines. I don't like, there's going to be all these things written about how the Giants have had this many losing seasons, or they're one of the only teams to follow up a 100+ win season with a losing season. To me, as a competitive person myself, I just don't want any of that, and I want them to finish as strong as possible. So it's nice to see the life that they've shown. Unfortunately, it took them until mid-September to get on a run like this, and also, I mean, you can carry it into next year and just carry it into the offseason and feel a little bit better about your situation as a player, because in order to win, guys are having some success. And also, somebody pointed this out, and I agree. The one potential downside, I don't think it's actually what's going to happen, but if somehow, like, the front office saw this performance in September and was like, oh, wow, we're actually in a better spot than we thought. And then they didn't feel as much urgency to have an aggressive and big offseason. But I don't think they're going to fool themselves by a couple of hot weeks when you're playing a lot of games against the D-backs and the Rockies. Plus, the season's not over. For all we know, they could go 0-6 the rest of the way. I don't think they're going to be fooled by one little stretch of games. I don't want to hear them talking about this as an excuse. That's what I fear, is like, if there really is some sense of, limited spending capabilities, and they're like, look, we played really well in September. We feel really good about these young guys we have coming up. I don't think that will fly, and I will totally call them out on that if they say that at any point during the offseason or going into next year. And that's really some of the kind of things we heard last year when they were saying, like, Brandon Belt was an MVP caliber player when he was on the field. And it's like, as Giants fans, we know that, yes, he was really good, but we've seen the best and worst of all of these players. And so we knew, like, Brandon Crawford was capable of not playing well. We've seen it for a number of years when he wasn't an elite hitter. And so just putting all your eggs in the basket of expecting and hoping those guys to repeat those performances, I think as fans, we could kind of get a sense that wasn't a great idea, and yet that's what they did, and that's what they were saying. So it's going to have to be a different rhetoric this offseason. It's going to be more like, the season didn't go as hoped. We need to make significant changes. So one of those guys who could be part of the change or not, I mean, bringing him back would be a good thing, no doubt, is Carlos Rodon, who just had another dominant start. We'll talk about his numbers and about where he stands in the Cy Young race. I'm not sure that he's done yet, in just a minute. But before we do, BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting information this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis of every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf, including odds of free agents and where they're going to end up. We discussed this just a few days ago, but we've got, Aaron Judge and Trey Turner and Justin Verlander. I didn't see Carlos Rodon. Odds of their next team. And I think it's interesting, we have somewhat inside information, not actual inside information, but being so focused on the Giants, we have a good idea that maybe they actually will be aggressive and end up with one of these big fish in the offseason. And the odds don't necessarily reflect that. So check it out. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to get into Carlos Rodon, who had his second to last start of the season, and it was as good as ever. I mean, he really would have had a hard time being any better. He went 6 innings. He struck out 10. He didn't walk anybody. He allowed 2 hits, including the first batter of the game. It really was a ball that probably should have been caught, but Jock Peterson, with a rare start in right field, put on display the reality that his defense just isn't very good. I think if Yastrzemski is out there, he probably makes the catch. But they had Thairo Estrada in left, and that pushed Jock Peterson to right, and then Yaz was in center. But Rodon, I mean, the season he's had, I remember when they signed him, the title of the podcast that we first put out was Giants Sign a Potential Ace in Carlos Rodon. And that potential has been realized in 2022. He has been everything that I thought he could be and more. Like I said, potential ace. The concerns were that when he started pitching like an ace, it was just last year. He hadn't really done that before in his career, but last year in 132 and 2/3 innings, he looked like this, and he finished, I think, 5th in American League Cy Young voting, despite only, pitching 130 something innings when some guys are up in the closer to 200 range. So there was also arm, injury history, and then last year his velocity kind of fell off a cliff in the second half of the season. He had shoulder fatigue, and there was some injury risk, but the only injury he's had is like a cracked nail that leads to some issues. Obviously, if your nail's cracked on your throwing hand, it's going to cause some discomfort. And that's the only thing he's dealt with, and it hasn't caused him to miss a start. He's made 31 starts, most he's ever made in a season. He's pitched 178 innings, the most he's ever pitched in a season. His strikeout rate is 33.4%, which is just ridiculously good. That's good for a reliever, and when you can sustain that as a starting pitcher over 178 innings, it is just truly impressive and something that puts him, in my opinion, firmly into that Cy Young conversation. I doubt that he wins it at this point. It is, by the way, first in the major leagues among qualified pitchers, a 33.4% strikeout rate. What's amazing is that number 2 is Shohei Ohtani. Shohei Ohtani is basically pitching like Carlos Rodon, but also hitting like, I don't have a direct comp. I'd have to look at the numbers and who's hitting like a all-star level impact bat and pitching like Carlos Rodon. Shohei Ohtani, as we've discussed a few times on this show, he's a free agent after next year, and the Angels have reportedly made efforts to extend him, and they haven't done it yet. And so if they're going to probably try again this offseason, and if they can't extend him, they really seriously should probably trade him. And if that happens, coming into this year, would anyone have expected that Juan Soto was going to be dealt in the middle of the year? No. And in fact, when the report came out that the Nationals were considering moving him, I even said it was very unlikely, even though we had legit reporters saying that they were going to consider it because of all the years of service time, all the years of team control. But for Ohtani, you're talking about 1 year of team control. And so if you don't trade him by the end of the year, you're going to lose him for nothing. You could put a qualifying offer on him, but you're going to get a nice return at this point. You're going to get a much diminished return during the season, if you trade him at the deadline because you've already lost many months of him, in terms of the acquiring team doesn't get him for the first 4 months of the season if you wait until July. And so it is a real possibility that he could end up being traded this winter. And if he is, my goodness, would he be a nice fit on any team. But really, I mean, the Giants in need of a face of the franchise and impact talent, and he brings that all and then some. So anyway, Rodon, though, edges him in strikeout rate on the season. If we look at strikeout rate minus walk rate, Ohtani is actually number 1 and Carlos Rodon is number 2, 26.1%. By ERA, Rodon, this is where he's not like at the top. He comes in at 12th in Major League Baseball at 2.88, but it's the peripheral numbers which are based on what I was just saying, strikeout rate, walk rate, home run rate. The reason we do this is because those are the things we know a pitcher has a ton of control over, is striking people out, walking people, and allowing home runs. If they put the ball in play, bloop hits happen, rockets right at people happen, and also bad defense or good defense happens and affects run prevention. And so that's why these peripheral numbers just take that, like when we say fielding independent pitching, it's taking out fielding because fielders can have an impact, and we want to kind of isolate the pitcher's performance. And especially for the Giants, I mean, the defense has had a very negative effect on a lot of guys. And for Rodon, the fielding independent pitching is first in the major leagues by a significant margin at 2.26. Now, I'm not saying that he would have a 2.26 ERA with a better defense, because sometimes, guys can just consistently over or underperform these numbers. But it is worth pointing out, he leads the major league in fielding independent pitching, and he's first in the National League in expected ERA at 2.73. So the introduction of expected ERA, I kind of lean to that a little more than I lean to fielding independent pitching, because it can account for the quality of contact against you and kind of give an expected number. So it's also isolating defenders. It doesn't matter if you actually converted that ball into an out. If the quality of contact is almost always an out, it's going to give you that credit whether or not the fielders converted into an out. And again, first in the National League in this category. And then wins above replacement on Fangraphs uses fielding independent pitching instead of ERA in this equation. And of course, WAR being a cumulative stat, it's not a rate stat, it's something you have to build up by putting up innings and being good. So Rodon, having that excellent FIP and also having 178 innings, he comes in first in the National League and in Major League Baseball among pitchers in wins above replacement per Fangraphs. And so for all of those reasons, he may not win the Cy Young Award simply because he's not leading the league in ERA, basically, and Sandy Alcantara. I mean, there are other guys, like Julio Urias actually is first in the NL in ERA at 2.17. Alcantara is now at 2.32. I don't know. I mean, Carlos Rodon, I might vote him number 1. I really might if I had a vote. That's how good he's been. So the big question, like the first big question is, I mean, maybe not the first, but one of the major questions in the offseason is, do they bring him back? And if they don't, do they replace him somehow? If you can trade for Ohtani, you've kind of replaced him in the rotation. But there are some other guys out there, Jacob deGrom, Justin Verlander among them, guys who could probably be brought in for shorter term deals than what Carlos Rodon is going to get. But just what a great season he's had. Double-digit strikeout king in San Francisco history, with 11 now, another double-digit strikeout game yesterday. Great year, one more start for him. Just hoping he stays healthy and gets what he deserves financially in the offseason. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to turn our attention to a couple of mailbag questions. Are J.D. Davis and David Villar redundant? And the answer is probably yes. So we'll talk about it in just a second. But first, all right, as promised, a couple of mailbag questions. First one coming from Jack, who says, do you see J.D. Davis and David Villar as being a little redundant? Davis more proven, but they're both right-handed hitting corner infielders who are a little rough defensively, and neither strikes me as being an everyday guy. just seems hard to carry both and Flores and maybe Longoria. And I think you're right, Jack. I think they are a little bit redundant. And certainly if you've got, like, imagine a scenario where J.D. Davis is on the roster and VR and Flores and Longoria, which they are now, by the way. But the offensive group, the position player group right now, does have a lot of redundancies and isn't good enough. I think that more than anything, like the revamped bullpen and then the starting rotation they have, I think the main issue with this team right now is the position player group. They don't have like truly impact talent anywhere on the position player group right now, and that's what needs to change the most. Now, one of the things is, I think that one of the best ways to have impact position players, like one of the best scenarios would be to have young, homegrown players start to be those impact position players for a number of reasons. I mean, first and foremost, I think that as a fan, it's the most desirable kind of player is a homegrown player. And also there's all this commentary about how the front office, like, they give short-term deals and platoons and blah, blah, blah. And it's true. And like, bargain basement hunting or whatever. But one of the big things is that when guys come up through your minor league system and they're making their debuts and whatnot, they are under team control for 6 years of service time. And so if the fans want players to get attached to, and they want players where they can buy their jerseys and know that they can wear them for a long time. If you have a young player come up through your system and be really good, those are the guys that you're going to get that jersey for. I mean, you can also supplement. You can go out there and get an Aaron Judge, a Xander Bogaerts, a Trey Turner, a Carlos Correa, and people will buy those jerseys. But my whole point about this is when we're talking about David Villar, like, it's worthwhile giving every opportunity to guys like this because of the fact that they're under team control for 6 years of service time, and he's 25 years old, and guys can improve as they get older. And so, but the other benefit to the team is that he has options. And so if he's not performing well, they can simply send him down. But I mean, J.D. Davis, he was so hot, and then he's gone on this little in a little funk, I guess, over the last couple games. Strikeouts and swing and miss are an issue with Davis, and he's not a great defender, like you said. Yeah, VR and Davis, a little bit redundant. I mean, the Giants, when we talk about Shohei Ohtani and trades, guys like David Villar could be attractive to a team like the Angels. I'm not saying he's the centerpiece and you're getting Ohtani for David Villar. I am saying 1 year of service time, 1 year of team control left for Ohtani. The price is not as steep as you might think. It's steep, but it's not as steep as you might think. It's not just Ohtani. It's Ohtani for 1 year. And that's a big difference. Like Mookie Betts came to the Dodgers. They didn't give up that much. They gave up Alex Verdugo, he was a good young player who didn't really have a path to playing time on the Dodgers. And they also gave up Jeter Downs, a top 25, top 50 prospect at the time. So the equivalent of that, I don't know, David Villar maybe not quite on that same level as Alex Verdugo, but a young, good player with some promise, plus maybe a Marco Luciano, and then you can get Ohtani. I mean, that would be pretty compelling, especially if you trade for and then extend, right? And so David Villar, if he doesn't necessarily fit onto the future of the Giants, they could involve such a player in a trade. And Joey Bart is another guy to think about in this vein. So, yeah, I do think they're a little redundant. Flores definitely coming back. Longoria is not a certainty, and they have a choice with J.D. Davis. So all of these guys, they have choices. They could non-tender J.D. Davis. They could option David Villar. They could decline to pick up the club option on Evan Longoria. And so they're not going to be stuck with all of these guys. And I think that they probably view it the same way you do, which is that certainly all four of them on the roster is probably a little bit too much of that profile of player. Longoria is good defensively, but still just third base. And I mean, I think Flores is a better kind of comparison with VR and JD Davis. the DH does exist, but you can't just have a bunch of DH types, which is part of what sunk them this year. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast Locked On MLB on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like the show, please smash that thumbs up button, rate it 5 stars, whatever you can do. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We'll be back on Monday. If the Giants are still alive, we will officially be hyped about it, but it's probably going to come to an end this weekend, maybe even today, as the Phillies continue to lead their game, and it would just take a total miracle for them to still be alive, but let's just hope for that. Anyway, have a great weekend. Can't wait to be with you again on Monday. You are now Locked On Giants.